Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Road Interviews. I'm here with a wonderful, wonderful guest. I'm flying solo this time because Vance, unfortunately, is feeling under the weather. We wish him well and hope he gets better soon. But we are talking with Tate Barkley and his latest release, Sunday Dinners, Moonshine, and Men. Tate Barkley carried the burden of shame for years, stemming from poverty, addiction, and the struggle of being a closeted gay man. Through Alcoholics Anonymous, he found sobriety and now seeks to inspire others by sharing his transformative journey. His memoir, releasing this month, unveils his troubled relationship with his father and his path to overcoming shame and a scarcity mindset. Tate reflects on his challenging childhood from rural North Carolina to poverty in Central Florida and their move to 1970s Houston. He details his battle with repressed sexuality, escalating drinking, leading to rock bottom. Tate's story resonates as he pursues self acceptance and inner peace. A Houston based attorney, speaker, author, and educator, Tate lives with his husband, Anson, and their dog, Emerson. Tate, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I am glad to be here.
All right. So, why don't you tell people how you started this whole writing process? Was it just an episode of catharsis? I mean, a lot of people, and this is, I'm going to preface this part of it. A lot of people think that, when somebody says, well, you should write your life story, that sounds, you have a very interesting life. A lot of people have like imposter syndrome in a way, and they go, oh, nobody's going to want to read what I've gone through, blah, blah, blah. What made you feel at the time when you started writing that, yeah, I've got something here, I've got something that might resonate with other people?
I think I had similar feelings to to the imposter syndrome. I was accustomed to writing. As you shared with everybody, I got sober, clean and sober through Alcoholics Anonymous. And part of that process of recovery, we did a lot of writing. We wrote out our resentments, our fears.
Oh,
We had
okay.
to write out an amends list, and we had to do amends. And there was so much writing involved, and particularly for me in early sobriety. And in 2013, I was out at the beach, and my dad had died back in April of 2012. And I was still feeling all these really mixed emotions about my dad. We had a very tumultuous relationship when he was alive, and could be love and hate. And I just started writing about that relationship and writing about all the things that happened to us and my family over the years. And then I did reach that point that you've talked about. And this is something somebody wants to read. But of all things, I had a nice lady who was transcribing, because I was dictating this, not writing it. So I had a nice lady that was transcribing it, and she gave it to me, parts of it back to edit. And she was a friend of my law partners. And then I got really busy at work. And about 8 months later, and I didn't pick it up again. About 8 months later, she comes to my office, the lady that transcribed, and she says, I want to know how it ended. How did it end? And I said, I haven't written the ending yet. I haven't had time. I've just been busy. And when she said, how did it end? What happened? I thought, well, if she wants to know what happened, maybe some other people want to know what happened to us as well. And that's kind of how it started. And here we
Excellent.
are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that that's part of the thing when people talk about memoirs. They often think, oh, I'm just somebody. I'm not, I'm not a real celebrity or anything. Why would they want to know about me? But I think what we forget is humans like being told stories. So even if it's a true story, it's a biography of sorts, or not a biography or memoir, you still feel the need to know how it ends, just like she said. There's something about us innately that's what we really want to do. How did you find the process of writing, and how did you decide? Because some people will do memoirs like postcards from their past, so nothing's really linear. It's just this vignette, that vignette, and you kind of get to feel your way through their life and their experiences. Or did you do it a chronological? How did you decide what was the best path to take when putting the book together?
The advice from people who are very, very smart. I initially wrote it as a chronology kind of my life. And, you know, I had plenty to say, I guess, because I wound up with like 658 pages.
Well,
And I started sharing it with some other people.
so there's you and Scarlett O'Hara. Got it.
There's me and Scarlett O'Hara. That's exactly right. And by God, you're going to know everything. Uh,
Right.
so, and she said, in my publisher and editor, really, she said, you know what's really interesting in this 658 pages? And she says, I confess, I just skimmed some of it. But she says, what's really interesting here is this relationship you have with your dad. Why don't you kind of go back and sort of focus on that relationship while all this other stuff is going on around? You know, you're repressing being gay, you know, growing up in a very conservative area of the South. And I mean, it's beat in your head that being gay, a homosexual, as they say, is an abomination. And you should be ashamed of yourself. So if you're feeling shame, you should be. You're gay.
Mhm.
And we get to shame you too. So in that backdrop, she said, and you were both alcoholics. And the only time my dad and I had a really, really good relationship was when we were drinking buddies. And for a long time, we were drinking buddies. And so I went back and I did it that way. And I realized, and here was the thing that I realized as I started writing it. I had done all these years in recovery and writing and resentments and getting rid of them. And dad was at the top of, you know, not at the very top, but certainly at the top of my resentment list. He could be very violent when he drank. We had a very chaotic life and we never had any money. But I thought I'd forgiven him. But I was about halfway through this book, Boz, and I realized, oh my God, you know, that's just, I haven't forgiven him. You know, I haven't done that yet. And I can honestly say by the time I finished writing it, I did feel that forgiveness, you know, and I feel a little regret that it was after he passed away, but it did happen. And that was the biggest takeaway from me from the experience, is because it felt like forgiving my dad felt like this great weight was lifted off of me. And so that was a benefit I wasn't expecting from writing the book, because initially I thought, well, let me finish this book. She wants to know how it ends. And, you know, I can share my experience, strength, and hope with other people, because I know there are other repressed gays out there. And I know there's, you know, in our community, sadly, often because of the shame we're put under, there is a great deal of substance abuse. And I got sober at the Lambda Center in Houston. And so I thought, you know, it's worth it to just go ahead and do this. But the real benefit for me is the forgiveness that I was able to give to my dad and the load that it lifted off me.
What I'm really amazed at is that, you know, I had a grandfather who was an alcoholic, and it definitely affected my relationship with alcohol. I don't drink. Occasionally I'll have a hard cider, but I don't really choose to imbibe because of that experience of growing up with someone who literally I could see as a child, I could see his life just not doing very well. And it had an effect on his relationship with my grandmother. So I had that kind of thing going on. What I'm amazed at is that you had all of this, that you were living with your father and the whole alcoholic kind of presence in your life, that with the alcohol in it, but yet you still found a way to find sobriety and then pursued law, for God's sakes. I mean that's not an easy climb. I mean, it's really, I'm really kind of blown away at the arc of your journey, and that alone I think is a tremendous hook. What was it like looking back as you were writing this and thinking, geez, I really did have an amazing journey to where I am now?
You know, I think once the kind of the dust settled with the writing, and I did look back on all of this, I think the first thing that I was taken by was how many people helped me along the way that didn't have to. It wasn't their job to help me. They just helped me because. So I think that was the first thing that I realized. I was amazed that I hadn't been put under the jail. And with the, you know, I had 5 alcohol related motor vehicle accidents, and where others were injured and I was injured. And So the first thing is just how lucky I was. I was a
Mm.
lucky drunk in that I wasn't dead and I wasn't in prison, and how many people helped me. And I think that that I was never really afraid, even in my drinking days, to sort of share and cry. And then once I got sober, that, I needed to share and cry even more. And so I think that helped me. I had a willingness just to be able to talk to other people and to be honest with them. In AA, they say, really is you have to be quote unquote rigorously honest. And rigorously honest, to me, they don't define it. They just let all of us define it for ourselves. And for me, rigorously honest means not only telling the truth, but telling the why behind the truth and letting that out there too. And as I started doing that helped me, stay sober. But most of all, it helped me be stable. I had so much instability that growing up, there was a great deal of instability. And then in the height of my alcoholism, I had a great deal of instability. And once I kind of settled down and was sober and could be stable, a lot of good things began to happen. And just from not drinking, I could show up on time and do
And
the
were you
basics.
able to see it at the time when those good things were happening? Were you able to recognize it?
I had this, you know, I had this experience, and I remember I was really struggling. And when my first, so I went over to my first sponsor. In recovery, you have a sponsor, someone that
Right,
helps you
right.
with the 12 steps. And I went over to my sponsors, and I said, I just don't feel like, I had kind of a job on the low end of the totem pole in the legal field once I got sober, and I was basically living at my friend's house, and my best friend from high school, and not really paying a lot of rent. And I wasn't feeling particularly, empowered at the time. And I went over to my sponsors and said, look at me. I mean, I'm 35 years old. I don't have this, I don't have that. And I remember him looking at me and he says, well, you know what? What I see is a man who's sober. What I see is a man who contributes at every meeting he goes to. What I see is a man who is working his steps. What I see is a man who is kind to others. And he kept doing that. I'm getting
Mm-hmm.
teary eyed almost.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm thinking about it. But he basically said, the lens you're looking at your life through, you just got sober. It's going to take a minute.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I can liken it, I didn't deal with alcoholism myself, but I went through a bout of cancer that was quite dangerous. And I went to cancer support groups and stuff. And I think one of the things that I really learned about that kind of environment is that those places really are safe spaces because you it's a one place you can go to where you don't have to explain yourself.
Right.
Everybody in the room gets it. They know. And so it's one of the places that you can truly let your hair down, and really get into the grit of what it is that you're dealing with. And so I when I hear you talking about it, it takes me back to, so this is how people's stories can relate to one another. They may not be the exact same journey, but you can see the similar and go, oh, I get you. I know what you're talking about. I'm right there with you.
That's right. And in especially, and I think that one of the beautiful things that I had, and my friend that I moved in with in early sobriety, she was 4 blocks from the Lambda Center. So I could walk. The Lambda Center was a place where people in the queer community would go and meet. It
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of different 12-step groups, AA, NA, and the beautiful thing you were talking about sharing in those groups, people got you got them, but there was no judgment. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
most of us who are in the queer community, as we come up, I'll speak for myself. I was so, afraid of being judged and being shamed that I didn't want to share the truth about me because the consequences might be terrible. And I talk about some of those in the book where they weren't so good. And So these groups, recovery groups, support groups, they're a wonderful place to where we can find our bearings and be at peace and sort of figure it out and know that we're not the only ones. And I think that that was the other thing that I learned from this book as I went through it, is how important it was as time went on for me to know I'm not the only person that felt this way. I'm not the only person that had fear. I'm not the only person that had shame. There were other people out there who felt that way. And Harvey Milk was so smart by saying, come out wherever you are, you know, because it works. It really does. If you know there are people like you, it's so much easier.
Right. And I think that what it does, your memoir is another one more testament to the fact that when you live your truth, you actually can grow and be more uh productive, more rooted and grounded in what you're doing, be more passionate about what you're doing, because you've taken off that stigma that you wore that kept you down. And I think that in these types of books like your memoir, one of the things people I think can take away from it is how, and especially queer people, we have a resiliency that's kind of built in. It's kind of a superpower we all share, that we go through some major
Mhm.
shit in life, and yet somehow we still find the need to rise above it and to climb out of that. And I just find it really rewarding when queer people, write their stories and put their voices out there, because, you know, straight people still don't get to a great degree why we have pride events. They don't get why we have to, have all these gay characters on TV shows. Well, the reverse side of it, they never want to look at how all of their lives were pushed onto us that made us feel ostracized and an outsider. So, with your alcoholism, did you know at an early age that you were gay, or was it something that because of your sobriety you started to figure out was part of the whole thing? And how does that work in Southern society? Because
You
I
know,
mean, being in California, and I'm not very, I know of what I know of in the South from movies and media coverage, but I've never lived there. So you might want to clue me in and some of our viewers and listeners.
I think for me, I grew up in a very conservative. I started in North Carolina, a very conservative part of North Carolina, and the traditions where you went to church on Sunday, and the philosophically the churches that we attended were very fundamentalist in nature. I mean, very hardcore, very right wing Christian, and so you were. It's kind of like I shared earlier. If you were a homosexual or adulterer or anything, you were your sin. Whatever your purported sin was, that's who you are, period. And though we talk about forgiveness, we're not going to really forgive you because, well, you're a sinner. So that was the environment that I grew up in. When I came up until I got to Houston, I didn't know any gay people, like any at all. And there was no one in my world that was gay or even,
But did you
and
know yourself?
for me, I had a best friend in sixth grade. We played football together, and he and I were inseparable. His name was Jerry. And Jerry and I were inseparable. And in the summer of 77, we started sort of experimenting with one another. And, I always think back and I chuckle. I had a girlfriend, and he was more excited about me having a girlfriend than I was. I wasn't. I did it because it was great cover, because by then I knew I kind of liked boys, in terms of attraction. But anyway, and that summer, Gene and I, we had, physically intimate experiences with each other, and it was my first time. And I knew that I liked it, and I knew that I enjoyed it. Now we eventually stopped because we felt so guilty because we knew we were doing something wrong, and at least that's how we were both raised.
Right,
It
right.
was wrong, and but I think I knew then without doubt that I didn't identify myself as gay, and I certainly didn't say I'm homosexual, but I knew deep down, if I was honest with myself, that I liked guys. And, in about a year later, after we moved to Houston, me and a bunch of buddies of mine, I was repressing, and I was around had a lot of guy friends, and I had my first alcohol on the banks of a bayou in Houston. And I have to tell you that when I had it was those old Miller High Life,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
7-ounce ponies, and I had a couple of those. And I have to tell you, I felt like I was Superman. My first beer buzz was one of the greatest feelings of relief I ever had in my life. And frankly, as I say in the book, I chased that same buzz until I got sober. I never got one as good as that one. And I felt courageous and I felt free. And I remember hugging my friend Ralph, and we were rolling around in the grass by the bayou, and I just didn't care. I wasn't afraid what people were thinking. Nothing really happened, but it was just a feeling. And that's where I latched on to alcohol as my coping mechanism. After that
Hmm.
first buzz, my adolescence almost was designed around how do I get my hands on booze, because I loved it so much.
How old
And
were you at the time when that happened?
I was 12 years old when I had my first beer buzz.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Huh. But you knew all along that this was a facet of your life, one that you couldn't talk about, and so
Yeah.
you use that buzz to kind of, so as a balm to soothe that pain.
Yeah, without doubt, alcohol is how I sort of soothe myself, and because I knew I had to repress. I was not in an environment where I could say that I was gay. I mean, it was just it wasn't going to happen. If you were called, I don't mean to use I don't bad word, but if you were labeled a fag in school, man, God help
Mm-hmm.
you. You know what I mean? God help you. And I knew that, and so when you repress like that and you're so scared, alcohol is just kind of good for relaxing you and giving you a little bit of relief. And I developed the habit of drinking alone in adolescence and as a teenager, because if I got too drunk, my inhibitions, Lord knows what I might do,
Right.
or,
Right.
or say. So I got in that bad habit of drinking alone too. But for that very reason, I didn't trust myself, but I knew I wanted it. I knew I wanted to drink, but I didn't trust myself to drink around, maybe other good looking guys.
Mm-hmm. Because you're afraid of what that could lead to, and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. Or what I might do and make a pass at them and misunderstand signals. And then the next thing you know, I'm getting my ass kicked. I mean,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
how it rolled in them.
Exactly. So how did you, when you got to the point of sobriety, how did you eventually come to terms with your repressed sexuality? And then what was the what how did you, and I this isn't in our notes, but I'm curious to, how did you meet your husband, and how did that transpire, and when you realized you had something here that you really want to pursue with another person, how did that make you feel as far as, your personal growth, and that, oh my God, I can have this too, kind
Mhm.
of moment?
Yeah. You know, Before I quit drinking, I started a very chaotic process of coming out. And my involvement in the gay community before I got sober was essentially going to the bars and trying to find sex. And I had to drink to have the guts to be that. I was very uncomfortable. I knew I had even come out and said I'm gay, but I was very uncomfortable around gay people, very uncomfortable. And I can't. I had never been around my own community at this time. And I also had this image in my head that, well, I don't want to be too effeminate and I don't want to be that. I mean, I was
Right,
doing all
right.
this analysis in my head that was making me crazy.
Stuck
And
inside your head.
yeah, exactly. And then, but I was comfortable enough to go to the bars and find sex. I mean, I was that comfortable with it, but nothing else. I didn't really have a lot of gay friends, and I didn't do that. Then when I lost a law practice, I lost a house, I lost a lot of friends in my years of drinking, and when I finally hit the ground and hit rock bottom, I lost it all, and it was of all things living with my parents. I was finally had the experience that took me to rehab. And I went to Hazelden and did 28 days and came home to Houston and started my life over again. Even in those early days of sobriety, I was very uncomfortable around gay people. But remember how I told you that one of my takeaways was how so many people helped me? Well, there was this guy, you know, in one of my recovery meetings, and his name was Scott. And Scott was, kind of guy I used to hang out with and shoot pool with and do all that when I was playing straight. And the next thing I know, Scott shares about his partner, John. So apparently Scott's gay. Well, my sponsor was in this meeting, the same guy that helped me earlier, and he was Scott's sponsor. And after that meeting, he says, "You know what? You two really need to be friends." so I didn't even introduce myself to Scott. I was still, in the corner, dreading what am I going to share, and will I sound like an idiot? And my sponsor's a big old guy, former Marine, and he's like, "You two need to be friends. Tate, when are you calling Scott tomorrow on the phone?" And so Scott and I traded numbers, and my sponsor set the time I was going to call Scott that was agreed to. And then after that, a real friendship developed. And the next thing I know, I just be honest with Scott. I said, "Scott, I've never been around a lot of gay people. So if I seem odd, I just want to tell you." And he said, "Okay, I get it." And the next thing you know, he's taking me to AA meetings that are predominantly gay men. And we're going to events where, gay pride events. And he's taking me around, and I start getting more comfortable. And he says, "Go to Lambda." I wasn't going to Lambda Center yet because there were still all those gays were there. Even though I'm gay, I'm going like, I can't be all those gays. And then it was Scott that said, "We're going to go to a meeting at Lambda. You good with that? Come on, I'll go with you." And the next thing you know, I'm making friends at Lambda, and this support network. And I get to that point to where we talked about where I can share honestly and not feel any judgment. And it was just it's truly a spiritual feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's spiritual. It really is. So Scott, my sponsor, just countless people who are, were blessings in my life that helped me along the way there.
And so when you met the guy who eventually became your husband, how what was that feeling like for you when you finally had, because I mean, when you date someone and you're kind of getting to feel each other out, literally and figuratively, it, when there is a point, if it starts to become serious, that you just kind of, there's a realization, at least it was for me. I've now been with my husband for 30 years, and we have kids and grandkids, the whole nine yards. I live the conservative nightmare. And but there's a point when you realize, oh, this is the real thing.
Yeah.
This is where I'm meant to be, and this is who I'm meant to be with.
Yeah.
And someone who had to deal with all that repression, and then the awkwardness within the queer community. When you met the man who became your husband, did you ever have that moment of, oh, I could have this?
Yeah, I did. We didn't have it at the same time, but I did. I had never had a relationship longer than about 4 or 5 months before I met my husband. I had resigned myself to the fact. I said, I'm just not a relationship guy. I'm not a long-term relationship guy. And I was okay with that. I'd kind of planned my life around it. I just, my space was my space. And I just, that was that. Well, when I met Anson, he was actually in fellowship up in Philadelphia, and he came home to visit his parents who lived down here in the Houston area. And we met, and then we went out 3 times. And I remember when he left, he says, "Well, do you want me to call you, whenever I get back?" And I said, "Yeah, call me when you get back." And so we started talking every night. I had this really hectic trial schedule at the time, and he invited me to Philadelphia, and there was no time on my schedule. This is now early January, between now and April. And I was just forlorn because I really loved hanging out, and it was super cute. And, he hit all the buttons for me, just immediately hit all the buttons. And so I just said, F it. I'm going this weekend. And I called him. I said, can I come this weekend? I'm sitting in an airport of all places, Texarkana, Texas, wrapping up a depot, trying to look at my schedule and figure out when I can go see him. And then I said, I don't care. I'm just going to go Friday. And
Gonna
he
be
said, yeah.
good to yourself. Yeah.
And I had the best time in Philadelphia. And I went up there and spent all day Friday with him and Friday night. And that was a great night. And so we're driving to this breakfast place he really likes. And I look over at him while he's driving and I say, it's about time I had breakfast with the man I'm going to marry. And he looked at me like I was effed up, and he says, are you talking about me? And I said, I'm talking about you. And we just dropped it, but I knew, and I can't explain to you why it happened. I just knew. It was a while longer before he knew, but I knew. And yeah, we've been together since late 2011, December 2011. We got married in 2017. Not long after it was legal.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, and I kind of knew it, and I really struck. I mean, living with somebody, and then Emerson was his dog, and I came from one of those old country families where dogs are outside creatures; they don't come in the house. But Emerson was very much a diva. He's a King Charles Cavalier, so he is coming in the house, going to be his. And so there was a lot of adjustment, but man, I knew right out of the gate that I loved him. I struggled with being in a committed relationship because I'd been so carefree and controlling of my space and my life, but it was just something I had to work on, and it's been worth it. Oh my goodness, so worth it.
I love that. I absolutely love that. So before we move on to getting to know you questions, can you just talk a little bit about what queer life is like that because obviously you went to Philadelphia and stuff. I don't know if you did anything queer up there with the community, but the South tends to have, let me give you my definition of Southern charm. My experience with any Southerners I've met, and this is a big generalization. I don't say everyone is like this. Obviously, the South is not a monolith, but generally, my interpretation of Southern charm is they smile as they slip you the knife.
But small town South is an interesting place, and that's not all Southerners, but small town South is an interesting place. They'll smile and tell you everything's just fine, and then they can be a little judgmental behind your back. So, right. I have kind of been out and about in the gay community in various places, and I think that I think more so than maybe most places, the stigma of being gay is still very pronounced down south,
mm-hmm.
and I think it impacts folks in different ways, and some of it good, some of it not so good. But we're under assault down here. There's not a state legislature in the South right now where the queer community is not under assault. And it's just when you think things are getting better, then there's
they pull out the old playbook from the 60s, and here we go again.
Here we go again. We're grooming, we're pedophiles, we're this, we're that, and
right.
we're all these evil things. And so it has an edge to it down here because look, they're in charge down here. They're not in charge in California or New York, but they're in charge down here, those people and so I think it makes people a little apprehensive by nature that it's like we have to be more careful. you know.
Well, yeah, I would just say, I know that a lot of Californians, and after the COVID thing, a lot of them started moving to the Austin area and Texas and stuff. So I don't know, some purple might be eking into that red in that state. We'll just have to see how
Yeah,
it plays
you're right.
out.
And I'll tell you, the good news is the urban areas are blue in Texas, the urban areas. This
Mhm.
is just a big state. So the ex-urban and the rural vote's a very powerful vote. But like I'm very comfortable here in Houston. I mean, because it's got a awesome queer community infrastructure, as I call it, where people can help each other, and it's safe. Austin certainly, Dallas, these are good places. But sadly, we don't control the state. We control little
Mhm.
pockets, and the state has systematically started taking away the legal rights of cities for that very purpose, and because we're too liberal in these urban areas.
Right,
So
right.
so anyway,
Whatever
it's
that means.
what yeah, which none of us are sure about what that is, but
I don't think they know.
right, yeah, we're not them, and then we must be liberals.
Yeah, right.
I guess.
I guess. Yeah, yeah.
But
Okay, so you
we
ready for
live here
some?
and don't understand it, so
Right.
I
No, well, that's for damn sure. All right. So, what have you got coming up next? Are you going to be doing any readings, any personal appearances you want to tell people about?
well, we got the book. The book actually gets published Sunday Dinners, Moonshine and Men. It actually comes out on September 25th.
Lovely.
And so we're looking forward to that. And I've got a reading taking place at Intra Bank Books up in Dallas on October 25th, and we're working out a few more readings that are going to take place. And we're pulling together a launch party for early October. So more to be revealed.
Okay. Well, where's the best place for people to follow you to find out where all the goodies are going to happen?
At tatebarkley.com. Absolutely the best place to follow me. Go to tatebarkley.com. And I'm on Facebook as Tate Barkley or Barkley and Barkley Tate on Instagram. So you can find out all those things.
Oh, lovely.
And in a more reserved way, I make announcements on LinkedIn too. So
I'm just amazed that people are still on that. I mean, I get it. I understand why people use it, but it's like when you think socially, it's like it's really not a social network. It's more of a networking network.
It's like, who will give me a job kind of place. But
right, exactly. I need to quietly quit somewhere, kind of thing. Okay. Any final words of wisdom?
But just thank you for having me here. I really do. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your podcast, because it's so important for us to have resources in the queer community to stand by each other and to connect with each other. So I'm elated to be a part of it, and thank you for doing it day in and day out.
Absolutely. Well, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Tate for being on the show. We at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. If you enjoy learning about new artists and hearing their thoughts on entertainment media, please like and subscribe so you can get the alerts for new episodes. The show is produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.ropepodcast.com. Tune in next week for your queer media fix.
Oh, what's that? Closing time. Bum's Rush and Melody, dear.